My name is Era, and I'm the host of the Tamil Creator Podcast. I chat with creators from all over the world to share their stories and discuss hot topics in a way that I hope inspires, educates, and entertains you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Tamil Creator. I'm your host, Era, and today I have a very special guest. He was actually someone that I thought of only after doing a previous recording with previous guest B. Beeman. His name, the guest today, is Ahilan Arulanantham. Did I get that right? I'm always messing up last names.
Arulanantham.
Arulanantham.
There you go.
Okay, thank goodness. He is a professor and co-director for the Center of Immigration Law and Policy at UCLA School of Law. He successfully litigated a number of really prominent cases, especially involving immigrant rights. There's a few that we'll kind of, go through and kind of explore further in our conversation. He has been the senior counsel and directory of advocacy and legal director for ACLU in Southern California. And he's also been a lecturer at the University of Chicago and California. And he was also the recipient of the 2016 MacArthur Fellow or the Genius Grant. Ahilan, thank you for jumping on, and thanks for bearing with my long intro.
No problem. Happy to do it.
We were kind of chatting before this, about children and for me being at that stage, I'm fascinated with how childhood and early decisions in your life kind of, spark these nodes of decisions you make that kind of lead you to where you are today. So for you, particularly in your childhood or those formative teenage years, was there any specific experiences or just anything that happened that ended up getting you to develop a passion for law and particularly around human rights?
Yeah, I heard a lot of discussions about human rights and law and refugees and politics in my household, because I grew up. I was born in 1973, so the war in Sri Lanka started in 1983, and I was 10. And there were obviously a lot of people coming out of the country. Most of my extended family, my parents' siblings, came and lived in our house at different points in time. Mostly in those first few years, from 83 to 88 or something like that. And then we had other refugees coming to our house. I grew up in Lancaster, California, which has a small Sri Lankan Tamil population. Our kind of family friends were other Sri Lankan Tamils who had very similar situations. They also had a lot of family members come. We'd have parties where everybody would get together, it felt like every weekend, or at least every couple weekends, at someone's house, and all they would talk about was the conflict in Sri Lanka. It was felt to me like that was the kind of singular topic of conversation. So yeah, that just played a massive role in shaping my kind of consciousness. That's not to say that I knew when I was 11 years old or something that I was going to end up doing law. I was interested in all kinds of things. I studied philosophy, I played soccer, whatever, various different things. But definitely by the time I was thinking about what to do after college, this was very heavily on my mind. And when I went to law school, I went really specifically thinking either about human rights in Sri Lanka or refugee and kind of refugee-related policy in the US.
For me, I guess because I live in Toronto and it's kind of the epicenter of Tamil activity outside of India, Sri Lanka, I take a lot of things for granted, especially when talking to folks like yourself and others that I know that live in areas where, you don't have a Tamil grocery store every block in certain parts, or access to Tamil food, whenever I want.
So, I was gonna say, I still remember when I first heard about Hopper Hut. It was years and years ago. And for a little island of this tiny community of Sri Lankan Tamils in Lancaster, we're like, oh my God, there's a place where they have a fast food chain that serves hoppers. It was incomprehensible,
Well, now there's tons of spots, and even not from the older generation but even the kids of those immigrants now, they're starting up fusion or their own spin on Tamil food. So I don't realize how spoiled I am. So I'm always curious because when people visit Toronto, they're they load up on Tamil food and they either bring it back or they just eat as much as they can. So for you growing up What was that experience like in terms of, yeah, you did have some, it seems like a presence of, other Tamil families, but I don't know if you had, like, what did you do if you had a craving for like Tamil food other than like your parents or family, like, or like even like get-togethers in the community? Like, tell me about that. I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, there were no restaurants. There's certainly no Tamil restaurants. I'm not even sure. I mean, it was a long time. I'm gonna guess that maybe there weren't even Indian restaurants in Lancaster until I went to college or something like that. I'm not 100% sure about that, but definitely growing up for sure when I was a kid, there was not. And we just didn't go out to to restaurants. And the food was the food that the people in the communities cooked. Those parties that I was talking about and the friends, our second generation or first generation, I guess you should say we are, because parents were immigrants. A crowd of friends are still some of my very closest friends in my life to this day, are people who I grew up with in Lancaster who are right around my age. And it definitely had there was a sense that it was like second family because we were so close. But I realized later that's also because we were insulated, because we were just this, tiny community of, originally it was, I don't know, 10, 15 families. And, then it got bigger after the war. But that we always had the sense that we were this kind of people apart. And Lancaster was actually really good. I think it was really good to us. I'm not sure you have any reason to know this. In some ways, it has a reputation for being it's a more conservative place. That's definitely true, and has a reputation for being a somewhat less friendly to immigrants place than, say, Los Angeles. But I did not experience like overt hostility, and as a general matter, I would say it was really good. It was really good to us. But still, also there was the sense that we were an insulated community. And I'm sure that was very, very different that if, we had grown up in Toronto or in London, for example. I went to graduate school in England and I remember going to Wimbledon, and that also just like blowing my mind. It's a completely different experience. The idea that there'd be a Tamil person walking on the street and I wouldn't know who they were or be able to talk to my parents and know within like, one minute who they were was just inconceivable.
I thought I knew a lot of people, and there's like two degrees of separation. I feel like not the normal six in the Tamil community, but there's still a lot of people, even given like the work that I'm involved with, that I still don't know. So it is pretty remarkable how big and how fast growing the Tamil population is in Toronto. Well, obviously, one of the things that really attracted me to your story is just kind of this important work, immigrant rights and just human rights in general. But before I kind of get into that, like some of the cases you're involved with, I think you're the second person I've interviewed that has won the MacArthur Fellow. Can you tell, for the people listening, like, what is that, and how did you become a recipient of this like prestigious award back in 2016?
It's kind of an amazing and bizarre thing. It's a grant with no strings of any kind attached, given by the MacArthur Foundation. In my case, I think the money amounts have varied over time. For mine, it's $625,000 that they give you over 5 years. So it's a lot of money for us, certainly. There's no application, and you don't even know that you're being considered. It's totally secret. And actually, there are very few immigrants' rights people that had gotten it in the years before I did. After I did, there were a couple of others like right around. I definitely knew what it was, but it didn't even, the idea that I might get it wasn't even on my radar. And apparently what they do, it's a foundation, obviously it's part of the MacArthur Foundation. It's a program that they run to try and pick out people. Even the selection process is pretty secretive. Like now I know that one of the things I can do is suggest names to them. But I don't really know in any detail what they do with those, other than to say they have their own internal staff of people who are researching people. And a lot of what they do in researching is talk to other people in your field. So one way that they explained it to me was it's sort of a validation in the sense that a lot of other people in your field thought that you were doing good work. But there's no age rule. Like quite people a lot younger than me and people a lot older than me got it. The fields are quite a mix. There's artists, there's scientists, there's musicians. There's not that many lawyers, but there are occasionally lawyers. So literally what happens is you get a call one day. I mean, I was in my office I was actually going to work and I saw a phone call, and I don't generally answer the phone if I don't know the number. So, I saw some Chicago number and I immediately put it to voicemail. And then it called again, and I again immediately put it to voicemail. And I had a brief due that day, so I was late. Not late, but I was like rush. I was like trying to get something done. I got to the office, pulled it up. It was like something like I can't remember, like a noon deadline or 11 o'clock deadline or something. So I was like hacking away, doing final edit. And then I see the same number come up on my work phone. And then I was like, oh, so this is whatever this person is in Chicago, they know both my cell phone and my work phone. So I picked it up. And they said, hi, we're calling from the MacArthur Foundation. And literally my first thought was, oh, you must need to speak to the development people. And I was like, oh, I can get you through the development people. And they're like, no, we need to talk to you. We need to talk to you. I was like, whoa, wait, what? And then they told me, and it was just crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And then they get all the people on who are involved in the selection, and they tell you. It was just mind-boggling. So yeah, it was really fun. It was really, really cool, really fun.
This episode is sponsored by nobody. That's right, nobody. So if you could be kind enough to hit that subscribe button, that would mean a lot to me. Two things. Did you ever hear of this award before you won it? And number two, do they give you money to continue like the work you're doing, or like what is the purpose of giving you money versus just an award?
Yeah, so I had heard of it. I didn't know about it, and it had been years, but there was a person in LA who had done really good work on immigrants' rights issues, named Julie Sue, and another person, Stuart Quo, two of them who had done work. But it was I can't remember how many, but it was many years before me. But I knew of them and the institution that they had built. So yeah, I did know about it. Yeah, the money is really strange. There's literally no strings attached. So you can literally do anything. You could go buy a car if you wanted. I gave about, in the end, it was something like 25 to 30% of it, something like that, to groups in Sri Lanka that I was supportive of, mostly because, the way my career ended up, I had done work helping Sri Lankan Tamils who have sought asylum here, who have been jailed in the immigration system here. I've done some work helping people who got ensnared in the material support of terrorism laws and the kind of national security state overreach. But really, it's just where it interfaced with American law. And I never really was able to spend a huge amount of time doing work directly on promoting justice, accountability, improvement in Sri Lanka directly. So I did that. Then I did other. I mean, I would say it gave me a security that I wouldn't otherwise have felt. Gave me more security not to worry too much about like just certain kinds of decisions in my career, because you feel a certain kind of like recognition and security in that. I did other funny things. I bought a fish tank that that actually really helped me get through the Trump administration. If I'm totally honest, I helped fund my daughter's college education, stuff like that. Just things that kind of give a kind of layering of security that made me feel more free to pursue the things that I wanted to pursue in my work.
Yeah, it's almost like a universal income fund for people doing, I guess, like, I know it's subjective, but important work. And yeah, like having that money is kind of a nice safety net to kind of not think about money when making those decisions of what to do with your time. So yeah, you talked about, kind of during Donald Trump's kind of run as president. I think there's, mention of you, especially in the work that you do and like kind of some of the mandates and policies that he had in place. It makes sense that you're quite busy during that time. I think one of the cases that was referenced, Ramos versus Nelson, I think and something called, something to end temporary protected status. So maybe you can kind of break down the importance of that case and like, what is temporary protected status?
Yeah, temporary protected status is a really important protection created by Congress back in 1990 as a method for the US government to decide that a country as a whole is not stable and therefore not a safe place for people who are living in the US from that country to be sent back to. And so the government has the power to designate a country as a beneficiary of temporary protected status. And there's rules in the law. It has to be based on a natural disaster or a war or certain other kind of criteria. Once the country is designated, then the law requires that it can be 18 months, more or less, it's complicated, but basically every 18 months, they do an assessment of the ground conditions of that country. And if things have not improved, then you have to allow the people to remain protected. And this law has been used a bunch of times by both Democrats and Republicans in the US for all, countries all over the world. But a lot of people in it, 400,000 people as of 2016 had it. And most of them were from Central America and Haiti, and also Sudan. And then there was a smaller population from Nepal. And a lot of people in the far right sort of anti-immigrant movement really don't like temporary protected status. Because if you think about it, it's just a pure humanitarian law. And once it goes into place, then if things stay bad, the government doesn't have any power to stop it. I mean, it does, but you have to make an assessment of the ground conditions. And if the ground conditions say the civil war in Sudan is still going on, or there's still thousands of people leaving El Salvador because the society is still kind of broken and the ecological problems and all that, then people get to stay. So the Trump administration really wanted to end it. And they tried really hard to do that. These political appointees came in and they kind of really tried hard. They overruled the objective country conditions people, and they reached these decisions, and it happened in a really short span of time. Over about 8 months, they tried to end the immigration status through TPS of about 400,000 people living in the United States. And then it got a bunch of news. I mean, we were following it because it was a huge, obviously massive impact on people. And we're talking about a set of people, by the way, the people, and it was from people from 6 countries. Many of them had lived here for 20 years or more because their countries had had a lot of problems for a long time. I feel like sometimes I tell this to people, it's really hard. You talk to somebody with a background in Sri Lanka, it's not that hard, right? Like 1983 to 2009, it's a really long time. And even now, it's not like, everything, obviously, everything is like fine in Sri Lanka. Places can be like that for a long time. And then, of course, you've got the American teenage kids or grade school kids of people who, if they've lived here 20 years, there's a good chunk of them who had kids. And so now these are kids who are American and they've never been to that country, and they're faced with a situation where the Trump administration, if it gets its way, they have to either go back to Haiti or Sudan, which is still in the midst of a war, or they have to be separated from their parents, which is incredibly sad. So that was the situation of these people, and then it got a lot of attention because there was actually a set of senators, a bipartisan group of senators who tried to essentially fix the problem that the Trump administration had created by proposing a law that would have given green cards, like permanent residence, to the set of temporary protected status communities that had been here for a long time. And they had a meeting at the White House, and that's the meeting where then President Trump said, why are we having all these people from shithole countries coming here? Why can't we have more people from countries like Norway? That was a meeting about temporary protected status and a way of trying to give a proposal to give green cards to them that senators from both parties had agreed to, actually. So we filed a lawsuit challenging the terminations because, like I said, they were inconsistent with the reality on the ground. And we also said that the decisions were actually motivated by racism because there was that statement, obviously, is a blatantly racist statement. But there's a lot of other evidence as well in the lead up to the decision that suggested that it was influenced by these anti-immigrant white supremacist groups that had been very close to the Trump administration. Now it's not that weird to say that because they're so out in the open, but actually back in 2018, there were still some people who were like, are you really going to tell a court that the president is in league with white supremacists? And we're like, yeah, actually, it's kind of the way it is, even though that's totally strange and seems so weird. And yeah, we won it. Initially, we stopped the terminations from going into effect. And it's a long story. I don't know if I want to get all the way into it, but the bottom line is the 400,000 people are still here. They had pushed to try and get Congress to pass that same deal that I told you about, but that hasn't happened either. So they're still living in limbo. They currently have status for sure through June of 2024. which is good. It's definitely better than it, having being, about to go out like at the end of this year or something. But it's not a way to live. I mean, if you've lived in a place that long, you have children like that, I mean, there really needs to be a way for people like that just to be permanently in the society. When you've lived there for 20 years, it's like, what are we doing? So yeah, that's Ramos in a nutshell.
What is maybe I'm getting it wrong. DECA, is that something that's supposed to help protect children of temporary protected status?
It's similar. So, and there are children of TPS holders who have DACA. The children I was talking about, who are a lot of the focus of Ramos, are Americans. They're born in the U.S., right? Because the way, obviously, I'm sure you and your audience will know this, but if you're born in the U.S., you're a U.S. citizen. You can't be deported, right? It's just the family separation risk, which is so massive because your parents don't get to get citizenship off of you, although they can after you turn 21, and it's complicated. But DACA is in the youth, and now they're not just youth; they're people of even younger than me, but still middle aged, I guess I would say. They're people who present a lot like the children of immigrants, like you or me, but actually they were brought here when they were really young. And so they might, they might have grown up entirely in the US. In many cases, English isn't just their best language, it's their only language, but actually they're undocumented because if their parents came here and either overstayed their visas or they crossed in the desert and never had status when the kid was like, 1 or 2 or 3 or something. Now, then they go to school and, they like everyone else in the world. Some of them, struggle to get by or whatever. Some of them do really, really well, and they like win the Pulitzer Prize for journalism, or they're doctors and lawyers and all the things, but they're undocumented. And DACA was a program that was created during the Obama administration to try and give those people some amount of security. It's not a green card, it's not permanent residence, but it's like, we won't deport you if you don't commit any crimes, and we'll allow you to work here. That's basically DACA.
Did you know that every time you left a 5 out of 5 review for this podcast, a Tamil parent lets their child pursue a career in the creative arts? Okay, that's probably not true, but if there's a chance that it is, do you really want to jinx it? Leave a review. Do it for the young creative in you. It's like a bit confusing to me because, these folks that grow up to be, doesn't matter if they're successful or not, but in the case where they are very successful or just, contributing in some way to society, and assuming by doing the thing they are doing, whether it's being a doctor or like working at the grocery store, they're paying taxes as well. So they're doing all the things that a citizen would do, except they don't have any of the protections. And I feel like, like you said, I can't imagine living somewhere where for 18, 20 years, like you don't know when you're going to have to be asked to leave, especially like, I guess the children are okay, but then you grow up with like your parents and all of a sudden your parents maybe have to leave you because if you don't want to go back, and I'm guessing the parents would probably want to leave their kids in the US for that opportunity because that's kind of why they crossed over, like took all these risks to get here.
Right. But the children think, oh my goodness. I mean, it's one thing if you're 18, it's another thing if you're 10 or you're 12. Many of my TPS holder clients have told me how the first time they told their children that they even were here on any kind of temporary status was after the Trump statements and the decisions getting announced. Because why would you tell an 11-year-old or a 12-year-old some weird thing about your immigration status when you've lived here for 20 years lawfully? They live here lawfully for 20 years. They have a work authorization. They do pay the taxes and they work and everything. And it really produced some really brutal, harsh conversations in families as a result.
I've heard, I'm Canadian, so like what I read is a lot in the media, and I don't know the things that you would know, but like how does ICE fit into this whole picture around like immigration law or like the rights of immigrants, and why was ICE created, and like what kind of powers do they have?
Yeah, I really think U.S. immigration policy, it kind of went off the rails in the mid-90s, and then it really went off the rails after the 9/11 attacks in 2001. So one thing which happened was in 2002, the government created this thing called the Department of Homeland Security. And it was all ostensibly a mission about protecting the homeland and defending national security and and it put a bunch of different agencies under one umbrella. Almost all the immigration enforcement, basically like all of it except for what's at the border. The border is different, but what's in the interior of the US, what they call the interior, was put under ICE, which is Immigration Customs Enforcement. And included in that is this really large prison system, which is only for non-citizens, includes and it includes people who are ostensibly not being held in what's legally prison. They're not like being punished by it. But it's a prison. It's run by private prison companies or county jails, or sometimes by the federal government directly. That actually started in the late 90s. So I don't want to give you the wrong impression. The 1996 law actually is what created the sort of modern infrastructure that built the ICE prison system, but it expanded dramatically after 2001. And it's funny, if you even today, if you read their rhetoric, and certainly before you read their rhetoric, it makes it sound like our job is to protect national security. It's like, never again, no 9/11. That's like all the rhetoric of it. But what they do is just garden variety immigration enforcement. Like, I don't know that I have a statistic for you right now, but like 90-something% of the resources, more than that, I suspect, probably way more than that actually, is being spent on just deporting and jailing undocumented people, or people who actually have a right to, have a valid immigration. Thank you. Who have a valid immigration document, but then do something that they work on a student visa, they're convicted of a crime or something, and then the government says, "Oh, we can take it away," and they might say like, "No, I still have a right to my green card," and then while that process plays out in court, they lock them in the jail. So yeah, that's sort of ICE in a nutshell. It's really, I guess there's definitely plenty of dysfunction in the agency itself, but the problems really have to do with the fact that the U.S. from even the 90s and certainly since 2001 has kind of viewed immigrants through a lens of a public safety threat, and has thought about the war on terror as partly a war on immigrants and a war on immigration. And that conflation of those two things is actually what produces a huge amount of dysfunction in our immigration policy.
Even though if you look at the demographics of the US, declining birth rates, etc., immigrants should economically looked as a source of strength, because if you look at, there's so many anecdotal, but like even just actual factual evidence of a lot of wealth creation and the economic engine of the US has been driven a lot by immigrants. But obviously they're not gonna, I guess they're not gonna tell that story if they're trying to do something else. They can't paint all immigrants as this positive story. And but
there's overwhelming consensus of economists that immigration is good for the economy, and yet somehow that doesn't prevent this idea of immigrants taking jobs and the hysteria associated with the dangerous immigrant from really permeating the culture, and then through the culture driving the policy itself.
Well, I look at it two things with immigrants. There's two things. There are immigrants that in the US and I guess in Canada to some degree do the jobs that quote unquote Americans won't do. Because farming, like when Trump was this whole thing rhetoric against like Mexicans kind of crossing the border, but a lot of the farming industry relies, and they were like in big trouble, and they were like not for that policy, because no American is going to be picking tomatoes for whatever they're paying those undocumented immigrants to work for. And the other thing is, on the other side, is because of kind of the American quote unquote American dream and immigrants and kind of their risk taking, because of if you're taking a risk by leaving a country, whether it's because of war or something else, you bring that energy and thinking and kind of resourcefulness to a place like America, where in the right circumstances you can kind of flourish. So you have the other side, which is people that are creating outsized gains that benefit them, but not just them, but like the American economy in general. That story is kind of really being missed, but obviously politics gets in the way of that kind of storytelling. The other thing is organizations like ICE, first of all, like such a scary sounding name. And then like, I guess second of all, like because of the promotion of, racial, like, or like, the far right movement, And if you look at both police departments and like ICE, this things I'm reading, obviously you'd be a lot more kind of aware of it. But the people that kind of tend to go into those kind of roles, especially after President Trump kind of came into power, were people that were, it seemed like a lot more of them were people that shared the views of like anti-immigrant, far right, people that for them, this wasn't doing a job, but this was kind of fulfilling almost like a fantasy of theirs of, protecting America from these immigrants that they personally hated as well. So, and then feeding also into a for-profit, I don't know the percentage, but a for-profit prison system, which has companies that include, what do they call those groups that pay
The
money?
the private prison companies, Geo,
No, no, they have,
Corrections Corporation of America. Sorry, or what are you talking about?
no, like people that spend money, like these companies pay these people to, there's a term for it. I don't know why it's slipping my, like where they go to Congress or like government to push
Lobbyists.
policies. Yeah. So they pay millions of dollars to these lobbyists to, number one, put policies in place, but also keep policies in place that should not be there to help feed into these, like the for-profit prison system is just crazy to me because, you have these laws which shouldn't
Talk
be
about
there,
a
but
moral hazard, right? Like
yeah.
I mean, my goodness, you create an incentive to lock people up.
It's a horrible incentive system. So, anyways, I just find like the American kind of immigration system like crazy. Even as an like Canadian crossing into America, like I'm like terrified of kind of going through the even though I've done nothing wrong. It's just like you're just like you don't want to say the wrong thing to kind of annoy somebody at customs. But yeah,
Yeah, no, it's a really a dysfunctional system in so many ways. I mean, what like you said, say the wrong thing. Those border patrol officers have incredible power. They have
yes,
power to deny visas even if they've been granted by or not honor, refuse to honor visas even if they've been granted by State Department officers abroad. And obviously, they have a huge amount of power in a situation like with Canada, people coming, on a visa waiver related program just to be just exercise arbitrary government power. And obviously, that's even apart from putting people in security lines and all that. I will never forget being sent into secondary inspection when I traveled with my father right after the tsunami, and we were in Sri Lanka doing relief work, and then we came back and we were sent into the secondary inspection line at the border patrol, separate place where they search your bags, interrogate you. They tried to separate us. I said, no, I'm his lawyer. I refuse. And we had this kind of very tense exchange. And it was so awful, and especially after coming after that. And it was such a heart-wrenching and draining experience to do that trip, and then to come back and this is the reception you get from your country. Yeah, it's an awful dysfunctional system in so many ways.
and in that scenario, I guess you and your father especially was lucky that you were a lawyer as well. I mean, I can't imagine somebody that's not that doesn't have the confidence of knowing the law as well as you do, kind of
Yeah.
protecting themselves.
I
Uh,
for a time it's less true now, but for a time when the conflict was live, and obviously when the government was much more interested in tracking LTT and its movements, but also and then in tracking people interested in human rights in Sri Lanka, because the FBI is not good at distinguishing between these things. There were a lot of people in our community who were getting stopped and interrogated at the airport, sometimes even pulled off the plane. Like the plane lands, and before anything else happens, these agents come and take one person and take them off the airport, which is so embarrassing and humiliating, without charging anybody with a crime because they weren't committing a crime. And so for a while, this also was a huge issue in Muslim communities all over. It's actually still is a problem in a lot of Muslim communities in the U.S. One of the things that I did a lot of was I would give people letters that stated the law and said very clearly that I'm not going to answer any questions beyond those that are needed to verify my identity. Because if you know my identity, you know that I have a U.S. passport. If I have the U.S. passport, I have the right to come into the country, and I'm not doing it. And I also try and train people. They can search your bags, but you don't have to answer any questions. If they want to sit there and go through your socks and look inside your toothpaste, container, that's fine. But you don't have to cooperate with this. And a lot of people did it. I think some people didn't do that because they felt psychologically pressured by the officials. But I thought it was really important because I thought it was important for people to not just accede to that. There's this incredible tendency that a lot of immigrants feel to prove that they deserve to be here and that there's nothing to be scared of by just being entirely sort of pliant and letting their rights get completely trampled. I think a really important role that the first generation can play, we have that security because we've grown up here, we know what our rights are, and we have a little bit more feel more empowered to assert them. It was like trying to teach people, hey, you can use this thing. And I think that did help a lot of people. It gave a lot of people security anyway. At least they felt a little more comfortable knowing they didn't have to get sort of dragged into like an endless conversation about everybody they visited and what all their phone numbers were and all those people and who they know and what you were doing in this place and that place. That problem went on in our community for a long time. I really get the sense that it's died down a lot now, but it definitely went on for many years.
Yeah, related to that, I think one of the cases you worked on was FBI versus Fazaga, if I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah,
And that was
Fazaga.
related to the Muslim community. And you kind of, before we kind of connected, you mentioned that was like a case that had, importance in immigration law. So maybe talk about that, as briefly as you want to talk about it. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So in that case, I actually argued in the Supreme Court just this past November. And we survived. I wouldn't say won, but the government tried to get the whole case thrown out, and the court did not do that. So that's a good thing. This is not a very friendly court to civil rights claims, at least the kind that you bring on behalf of immigrant communities. But yeah, the case arose out of this really set of incidents that happened in Southern California many years ago now, where the FBI sent an informant in to spy on Muslims indiscriminately, just people, Muslim community members all throughout Southern California. And the only instructions were just gather as many names and phone numbers and license plate numbers as you can and just spy on everyone. He wore a wire, recorded all these conversations. And, the way Islam, as I understand it, works is you have an obligation to bring converts into the community and try and teach them the basic tenets of the religion. The people welcomed him, and this is back now. Informants is much more widely understood that the FBI uses a lot of informants. There's a lot more justified skepticism toward outsiders, which is sad. Actually, it's really sad because it's really contrary to the kind of basic thematics and sort of culture that goes with the religion. But back then they let him into their lives, and some of my clients brought him home, and his mom cooked food for this guy, and had many intimate conversations, and the whole time he's recording. And then eventually his cover got blown, and that gave us a lot of information that the FBI was actually targeting people just on the basis of their religion. So we brought the lawsuit, and the government basically said, we promise that we don't do this. We promise we don't actually target people because of their religion. But to actually defend ourselves against your lawsuit, we would have to reveal secret information until your whole case has to just go away. And then they invoke this doctrine called the state secrets privilege, which they say justifies this. And the case, I mean, it's a very technical case, but it really turns on the contours of that. We say that's wrong. That's not, the state secrets privilege doesn't mean that, doesn't allow you to do that. And we also said, if you want, show the stuff to the judge. Don't show it to us. If you say you have some defense, show it to the judge and let the judge decide whether actually it's true that you don't target people on the basis of religion. And we know this because we know all these people that this guy spied on, including our clients, are these amazing people, an imam at a very prominent mosque in Southern California, a guy who works doing great work in the medical technology industry, a computer programmer. These guys have never been charged with a crime. They've never been arrested for anything in their whole life. And this informant spent like hours and hours spying on them. So obviously, it strongly suggests when there were dozens of people like this and more, that probably he was just spying on people because of their religion. And so that's sort of what happened. And we won in the lower court and then the intermediate court, and then the government got the Supreme Court to review it, tried to get them to toss out the whole case. They narrowed our case, but they did not toss it out. And so we're still kind of fighting in court, trying to just get to the day when we can just present the facts. All we want to do actually is present the facts. I think if we get that far, it'll show that there there has been just a huge amount of religious discrimination against the Muslim community by the FBI in the United States, going back to 9/11, I'm sure, but at least definitely in Southern California for the years that that the case is about.
Wow, like you must be a fun guy to kind of have dinner with and all these interesting stories. Well, like there's a saying, or like a joke that those that cannot do teach. And I know you teach, but you definitely kind of have the credibility. It's like it's like Tom Brady being like a football coach, It's like you maybe you're not going to be a good coach, I don't know, but but you chose to kind of step into kind of teaching and being professor in addition to doing kind of the important work that you do in the field. What was the reasoning behind, making that decision?
Yeah, I actually love teaching, and I loved training younger attorneys and kind of sharing what I know and getting their perspective. I had done a little bit of what they call adjunct teaching, which is like trying to teach while also having a full-time job a couple times, and I loved the teaching, but I thought I'm going to die if I try and do this like while working full-time on my full caseload. So the idea was to make a transition, but find a role where I could still, and it's exactly what you said, where I can still do some amount of litigation and advocacy, but also carve out enough space to teach. And a couple of years ago, UCLA sort of recruited me to try and create the center where we could do that and also hire other people into it, so that we could really spend the time to think about really interesting ideas in immigration policy. And also I would have space to teach students. So yeah, for me, when I teach, I definitely bring a lot of my work experience and the cases that I've worked on, the people that I've met, my understanding of litigation. I think there's a lot of ways to be a good law professor, but for me, the way is really to try and immerse the students in my kind of practical understanding that comes from my years practicing law.
As you talked about UCLA kind of recruiting you, I think of, I don't like the term, but networking but more so I look at it as relationship building. For you throughout your career and maybe your recent opportunities, have you found that relationship building or building a network, has that been kind of fruitful? And is this something that you spend a lot of time doing? And also, I know you like to teach and kind of mentor, but how about on the other flip side of you being mentored? Do you believe in being mentored? And do you have any do you have a relationship with a mentor that's kind of had an impact on you?
Yeah, I think
money can be hard to come by, but here's a $100 opportunity for you. Join my free newsletter for free exclusive content and a free chance to win $100 when I hold special draws. Did I mention that it's free?
I haven't been extremely self-conscious about trying to build a network in a conscious way. It sort of happened organically over time. Although I wonder sometimes if I would have been more effective at my job if I had, because it is absolutely true what you say. And times when it happens sort of by accident, and I end up with friends who are well positioned or people who I cross paths with who are really well positioned to do really great work. I hugely benefit from that, and vice versa. I think I never, when people contact me, I almost always feel like, yeah, if it's somebody who I know and I remember and I worked well with, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm definitely happy to just do what I can to support them. And it's something that I think when I was younger, I'm talking about college and early law school, I might have looked down on it a little bit, oh, networking, But now as I see it over, this is just how human engagement happens. There's definitely a risk. You don't want to be in a position where, you only hire your friends, because obviously that can produce certain kinds of discrimination and insular thinking and be problematic in ways like that. But you can temper that and still build your networks and really gain from that. And I think, I think if I had not had a sort of negative impression about the concept of it when I was younger, it probably would have benefited me more. As far as mentors, I'm not sure there's any, not a lot of lawyers in the Sri Lankan Tamil community before my generation of people in the US. Obviously, there were in Sri Lanka and other places. So, in that sense, not exactly, but there were definitely people who I worked for who taught me a huge amount and who I learned a huge amount from. My first boss at the ACLU was this man named Lucas Gutentag, who was the founder of the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project. I worked for him in New York. Amazing person, brilliant lawyer. He's actually working on immigration policy in the Biden administration now, and he's also a professor. He advised me in a lot of my cases. There's another person who kind of like me made the transition named Jayshree Srikantaya. She's a professor at Stanford Law School. Definitely like looked up to her and followed her kind of career path and learned a lot from talking to her. We also did a bunch of cases together. Those are some people, but there's not like a, like one person who's like, oh, that's the person I want to be, and I want to kind of be in the world just exactly like them, which I think is partly the product of being a first generation, right?
What's been like a failure or like better quote, like a learning lesson that you've experienced in the last, let's say 3 to 5 years, and like what did you learn from that?
I mean, definitely the case which to this day eats at me and is really the one that I feel most pain about when I think about. It's not one case, it's a set of cases that we did over the course of like 5 years, starting in 2014, to try and force the government to give lawyers to children facing deportation. And we brought a number of cases trying to just establish this really simple thing, which is if you're a child and you are in an immigration court and you're facing deportation and there's a trained prosecutor who is arguing in front of a judge that you should be deported, that you should have a lawyer, and that you can't have a fair hearing unless you have a lawyer. And if you can't pay for one, or your family can't pay for one for you, then you need to have a lawyer appointed. And we never lost in the sense there wasn't a court that said no, but they closed every door. They said you can't bring it as a class action, you can't bring it in the district court. And we brought it through some other way, and they said, "Oh, well, your child wins on some other for some other reason, but we're not deciding it." When we brought it another way, they didn't decide that. We brought it other. I mean, like all these different ways. I argued this in front of I think at one point I counted like 15 judges, federal judges, from multiple levels, and then we never got a ruling. And to this day, the Biden administration is deporting children. They're ordering children deported in immigration courts when the children are unrepresented. I know there's so many dysfunctional, crazy things about our immigration system, but this is like way up there, way up there. And it just seemed like such a basic, obvious thing. We tried so many, we brought it in court, we brought it to Congress, we did advocacy at the local and state levels. We did social media campaigns. There's amazing videos. You can Google some of this stuff. ACLU toddler video. Take a look. It's this video of people interviewing 3 and 4-year-olds about as a joke, about their knowledge of immigration law, because I was deposing. I took the deposition, the sworn testimony of a government official who was supposed to train immigration judges, who told me that he could teach immigration law to 3 and 4-year-olds. And I have it on tape of him saying this from a deposition. And they demoted him, like essentially fired him from his job, but they still kept doing it, and when it went public, that went really public. So that one, it pains me to this day. I think a lot about what could we have done differently. We should have filed the case in a different way. We should have argued it in a different way. We should have filed it in a different court. We should have done the timing. If we'd done it sooner, we did it by the time we did it, there was a lot of Central American children coming. I think if we had done the case a year earlier, maybe we would have won it much more easily. I don't know, but so many things I think about, but we might have done differently with that.
But it's crazy, like the way you break it down. It's like, yeah, like a trained lawyer essentially that's prosecuting, let's say like a 4 or 5-year-old. Like, how are they going to defend themselves without? It makes
no
sense. That is crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy, and you see these reporters have written stories about this when they've managed to get into court, of these kids who are there, and the judge tries to talk to them, and they're like dangling, their feet don't even touch the ground. And of course, they never say anything coherent. They never have a proper hearing. The judges just order them deported most of the time, or they close their cases. Some judges are human. They think it's crazy too. They try and find a way to close the case and somehow avoid the entry of the deportation order. But thousands and thousands and thousands of them have been ordered deported since really going back to 2014. It's been happening.
Yeah, like how can a child who is barely learning to speak, and especially if they're an immigrant, that English isn't their first language, be I'm like a grown man, and I would definitely struggle to defend myself in a court. So anyways, yeah, I can see that. Where do you see yourself, the next, 3 to 5 years? Like, do you still see yourself continuing to just a kind of combination of teaching and advocacy work, or do you have any other plans?
Yeah, I like this. I mean, it's new to me still, right? Because I've only been at UCLA since March of 2021, and doing something different after almost 20 years is interesting. It's invigorating in some ways. It's definitely a little stressful. It definitely gives you a little, this new crowd, new set of people. But yeah, I like this, and I would guess that in 5 years I'll probably be doing something very similar to what I'm doing now, I guess.
If you had a chance to go back in a time machine and visit your 16-year-old self, what would you tell him?
My 16-year-old self. I think I'd say enjoy the soccer because it won't last forever. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what if I could give you a more serious answer when I was 16 years old. It's tough, like at that age, there's so many things I did not understand about the world and which way things would go. Yeah, I'm not sure that is a real thing though. Like, I feel that I can't play soccer anymore because I'm too injured. So I get too injured too much, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I wish I had kind of treasured it more than I did, probably.
I think it's good advice, play more because nothing
Yeah.
is finite, or
Yeah.
nothing is forever. Sorry.
Infinite. Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of your personal legacy, in a few sentences, or like as however you want to describe it, but how would you want to be remembered by your friends and family?
I definitely want to be remembered as a good parent and husband and son, and hopefully somebody who kept our family close and kept our sense of ourselves, our identity close in a time when it's tricky to do that because we're spread all over the world. Even now, my extended family's all over the world. In terms of work, I think just know that I mean, I hope I'm remembered as someone who tried to make the world fairer and more just, and also that had some ideas that maybe would stand the test of time. I hope that some of the ideas that are out there, from whether from my cases or from my writing, whatever, are ideas that people will think about, even, I don't know, 20 or 50 years after I'm gone. That's a lot to hope for. I don't know that that'll work out, but that would be awesome. Yeah, that would be awesome.
Well, that's kind of a good segue into the final segment. It's a fun speed run I like to call Creator Confessions. I'm just going to say a bunch of statements, and
Okay.
you just tell me the first thing that pops to mind. Ready?
Okay.
Favorite Tamil food?
Udiyappam.
Something that scares you?
Horror movies.
Insecurity that you have?
Uh, don't play the piano well.
Oh, interesting. Favorite TV show
Like
you're watching?
like
Ah,
scared to play in front of other people. Like say
okay.
that. Sorry,
Favorite TV show you're watching?
the World Cup right now.
Uh, Somewhere you're itching to travel to?
Bolivia.
A fellow Tamil creator you want to give a shout out to?
So many. Dilo. Do you know Dilo?
Yes.
Nimigarinathan. If you're in Toronto, we suited Xavier, who's a fantastic law professor in Toronto. Yeah, those are some. There's plenty others, but Mario Arudas, do you know who that is? He is a scholar of Tamil political history, and he used to work for. He still does, I think, this human rights work related to Sri Lanka.
Favorite childhood memory?
Playing in the backyard with my brother. Yeah, soccer, basketball, other stuff.
Something you like to do for fun outside of work?
Bicycling.
Favorite movie of all time?
Ooh, boy, that's tough. Amadeus. There's a lot. That's really tough, but Amadeus is definitely one of them.
A purchase you've splurged on recently that you have no regret about?
But I have no regret about. There's the big fish tank, but it's like kind of crazy. So yeah, I'll go with that one. I want to have no regrets about it.
Pet peeve of yours?
People thinking I'm Indian do not like that.
Us. Like if you knew that you were going to die tomorrow, a regret that you would have.
Ooh, I mean, think about uh, not having spent more time with my family, and particularly my child.
Celebrity or person whose life you'd want to experience for just one day?
Gandhi.
A book you've read or a podcast you've listened to that's had an impact on you?
Um, how to hide an empire. Do you know that book?
No, I will check it
You
out.
should check it out. It is fantastic. How to Hide an Empire by Daniel Immerwahr. Really good book.
A belief, behavior, or habit that's improved your life?
Uh, not staying up late to do work.
Good one. I've adopted that too. A piece of advice and finally, a piece of advice that you would give to your fellow aspiring Tamil creators out there.
I don't know if I have any advice, but Tamil creators are fantastic, you know. We're such a vibrant, amazing community. I don't know that I would say be yourself, you do you, something like that.
That's great advice. Well, thank you, Ahilan, for kind of jumping on and, sharing your wealth of knowledge and like your interesting stories. I mean, like I said, I feel like you definitely be a good, dinner buddy to kind of, or beer buddy just to kind of
Someday,
hear all
man,
these stories.
if you're ever in LA, I'm serious. I'm totally serious. If ever life ever brings you, I guess with two-year-olds may not be happening anytime soon, but if life ever brings you to LA, let me know. I'm actually I want to find a way to get to Toronto. I do have a bunch of friends there. And I haven't, I mean, years and years since I've been. So if that ever happens, I have a lot of family and a lot of friends in Toronto, as you might imagine. So.
Yeah, I know. I mean, next time you're here, I'd be happy to take you to some of my recommended food spots to get you your dose of Thelma food.
Awesome, awesome.
Well, thanks again, Ahilan, and appreciate you making time. And for those of you listening, thank you as always, and on to the next episode.